Well, hi everybody, it's meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Here we are on a Monday, President's Day, the 18th of February, 2019. And of course, we've got another storm system on our doorstep. Now, I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, if you haven't looked at my instructional video on snow maps, after we're done, go take a look at it, or at some point before this storm is over with. Take a look at that video. The maps on there are not from this particular system coming up now, but they're very important because looking at it is very important because those snow maps are completely misinterpreted. They're flying around all over the place. People look at those raw numbers, and the maps are not good forecast tools. It's one thing to look at it and say, well, this is where I think the snow is going to fall. That's fine. But in terms of the specific amounts that it spits out, they're completely unreliable. And unfortunately, they are tools that are used by those that are, trying to just kind of rev things up as far as the excitement about this sort of stuff is concerned. And I'm just not, I'm not doing that. I'm trying to put everything into context. I know everybody forecasts shops. So I'm going to go through the Weather Service numbers for the areas from Virginia on up into New York State and southern Connecticut and everybody in between. I will show you that I am underneath those numbers and I have my reasons for it. Now, I could be here tomorrow night and perhaps I'll change my mind, but from what I'm seeing right now, it is very hard for me to get bullish on this system. In particular, after what happened with last night's system, and I did a late live stream while it was happening, and the radar echoes were showing how the system was not coming together at all. In New England, the amounts were being forecasted up to half a foot, and most places got less than half that. And then there were places that should have gotten a couple of inches that barely saw enough to make a coating. So, this really is a signature winter here with respect to the fact that you kind of have to watch what's happened. A lot of times these models have overproduced in terms of numbers, and then in terms of performance, they have underperformed. It's maybe a little bit less of the case in the Mid-Atlantic states. With the major storm that occurred back in December, you had the storm in January. I think your area probably has a better chance of coming up closer to par as far as what models are producing. But I got to tell you, I'm a little bit suspicious about what's going on and how this is all going to play out. So let's get going. Quick hellos to those of you signing on from watching it from my free weather app, which you can download on Google Play or on the App Store. To the folks down in South Central Pennsylvania, North Central Maryland, SNS Storm Chase and Forecast Team, my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Chaffee, Angry Ben's Facebook page, Angry Ben's Angry Weather, and the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut Storm Watch page. So let's start by breaking down where what's going on with respect to watches and warnings. And we can see the lead area here of winter storm warnings that are down in the southwest in New Mexico and Arizona, and the advisories that you see up across Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and into eastern Nebraska. Winter storm watches easternmost Nebraska into parts of western Iowa. So this is the seedling system that is coming eastward, and that is happening tonight into tomorrow. We've got flood watches up for Mississippi, Alabama, much of Tennessee, Kentucky, into West Virginia, and also into southeast Ohio. Part of West Virginia is under a flood watch. The eastern part is under a winter storm warning. Winter storm warnings are now up for eastern West Virginia, the southwestern Virginia, into western North Carolina. The issue here, they're not forecasting big amounts of snow here. It's more along the lines of some accumulating snow of a few inches and then a changeover to sleet and freezing rain, and then ultimately it'll go to rain. Winter storm watch is up for northern Virginia, including Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, and southern Pennsylvania, all of south central and southeastern Pennsylvania, including Philadelphia, York, Lancaster, Reading, Allentown, and also for the western counties of New Jersey. The eastern counties and the coastal counties are not under a winter storm watch. We also have a winter storm watch up for the state of Delaware. So this is going to be the winter storm warnings as precip starts tomorrow night in southwestern Virginia and in northwestern North Carolina, and then gradually spreads northeastward from there. Figure it gets to the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area around daybreak. The timing would suggest maybe getting to Philadelphia about lunchtime, and then snow may not reach New York City until late in the afternoon or evening, and then the question becomes, well, how much is going to be left by the time it gets there? So on to the snowfall forecasts that are out there, and I'm going to show you everybody's, and then I'll show you mine, and I'll give you my reasoning as to why I'm at where I'm at. And as I said, everybody forecast shops. It seems like everybody forecast shops to find the most apocalyptic numbers that they can, and then they attribute them to me. So I want to be clear about this. It's really important when you consume. It is amazing to me when I see people consuming this information and what comes back to supposedly what I said or what a forecaster said. It's amazing to me. Everybody seems to just pick up on one or two key words, and that's what they go. That's what they retain. And unfortunately, when it comes to weather, you have to pay attention. Okay, so here's a wide view of the snowfall forecast amounts. I've brought it down into Virginia to about Harrisonburg, and then on the north side, we'll take it up into southern Connecticut. And you can see how the amounts actually are higher across Maryland and Virginia, and then they start to tail off as you go northeastward, and then they really start to tail off as you head toward New York City and Connecticut, Hudson Valley, and Long Island. And the reason for this is not a storm that's going out underneath us. Usually you would see a profile of higher snow amounts to the south because a storm is passing to our south. What's happening here is that the precip arrives into the mid-Atlantic states while there is still a lot of cold air around. But after Wednesday morning, that cold air to the north erodes very quickly, and as a result, the area of precip as it lifts northward, the snow area winds up getting whittled away and just about destroyed by the time it makes it up to southeastern New York and into Long Island and Connecticut. This is because of where the high is going, and I'll explain that in a lot of ways. The storm is very similar to the one last Tuesday, but there are some very important differences in how this is all evolving. Okay, so here's how it looks from New York's standpoint for snow accumulations. And whenever you use these maps, please make sure you check the timestamp, because if there's a system ahead of it by a day or so, or a day and a half or so, and you're looking for the information, you might see numbers for the wrong storm. So right now, the system from yesterday, of course, is long gone, so it's not an issue anymore. So for the New York area, we're talking less than an inch for much of Long Island, and about an inch to 2 inches as you move across New York City to the Hudson Valley and into southwestern Connecticut. I'm with these numbers. I think these numbers make sense. I can't at this point go higher based on what I'm looking at. Now, here's how the snow lines up in New Jersey, and you'll notice the higher amounts as you go west and as you go south, and you start to get into these 3 and 4 inch amounts, 1 to 2 in Monmouth and Ocean counties, down to Atlantic and Cape May County, and then you start to pick up into 2 to 3 inch amounts. Again, this is via Mount Holly, 3 to 4 for the northwestern counties, except for Sussex, where most of Sussex in 2 to 3. The reason why winter storm watches are up here because it's a changeover to sleet and freezing rain. How long does that last? That's a big question. I think we're going to wind up seeing the sleet and freezing rain zone getting eroded faster than what models are showing. And then you start to get into 3 to 4 in Allentown, Doylestown, Philadelphia. I'm okay with about 3 inches with this zone. 4 to 6 for Reading and Coatesville. I'm not. This is where I start to have a little bit of a problem with some of these top end numbers. Down to Chestertown, it's 4-6 in Maryland and Eastern Maryland, Easton 3-4, Dover 3-4, Wilmington 4-6. I don't know. That top number to me is a bit worrisome. And in South Central Pennsylvania, actually all of Central Pennsylvania, you'll notice here again the amounts go lower as you go north. Some of this has to do with the timing of the arrival of precip, but you're also going to see that snow area getting whittled away anyway as the day goes on. They're going, 4 to 6, generally 4 to 6 inches south along and south of Route 76. I think that's a little high, frankly. Again, that's my never to be humble opinion. I could certainly sit here tomorrow morning if I see parameters are different. I'll gladly massage the numbers up, but so far this winter season, the payoff has been if you've gone below what models have indicated. Now down in Virginia, we're looking at, this is where I think it may be a bit more problematic in terms of figuring out where the top ends are. I don't know. I know in the western part of the state along I-81, you got a lot of the mountains are there, so you've got elevation coming into play. So perhaps because of elevation, some of these numbers may not be unreasonable. They've got Washington at 6 to 8 and Baltimore at 4 to 6. I would kind of lean more toward the low end than the high end, based on what I'm seeing. Now here's my forecast, which I don't have the map extending far enough south. Now I've got Washington sitting inside a zone of 2 to 3. I have the same idea of that max line pushing eastward into western New Jersey, but I'm thinking 3 inches on the top side here for Philadelphia, just south of Trenton to Reading, just north of Harrisburg, and then I have that 4-inch or more area pushing up into south central PA, and then go back into western Maryland and into northwestern Virginia. I made this forecast yesterday. Usually what I do is when I make these forecasts, these early calls, I don't really change them very much until maybe the day before or when I feel confident in kind of making a final call. It gets very confusing for people, when you start seeing forecast snow maps changing every 6 hours. They're confusing on apps when you get those notifications. They're confusing when you see them done on television, going back and forth. I kind of have this idea of how this is going to play out, and then I watch to see whether my vision of what the weather is, and if the models come to my vision. All right. Notice I have 1 to 3 inches north of here, on up through New Jersey, including New York City. I have 1 to 2 for Long Island, and also that includes Connecticut, the Hudson Valley, this sort of broad area. I wanted to indicate that this area of heavy snow is going to be weakening as it moves northward. Now, I wanted to show you one of the forecast tools that I use. Everybody, is pulling up snow maps, okay? In specific, we pull up the NAM. I'm going to pull up the snow map of the NAM to make an illustration with regards to what the NAM snow map shows, and then what the numbers actually show. So I'll take it to, I'm going to make it apples to apples, and here it is through 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday. So you'll notice that the NAM has snow up to just south of New York City by then. One of the things that I look at when you look at the model is not just the maps themselves, but there is a numerical breakdown of what is going on, and I can pull up that numerical breakdown. Those were those numbers you saw before. You see down in southern Ohio and also into southeastern Indiana, you've got this model putting down ridiculous numbers. There's not going to be 20 inches of snow in southern Ohio, okay? There's not going to be a foot to a foot and a half there. The maps do not take into account sleet and freezing rain. They have to be subtracted out of of the of what you see here, and that's the tough part. You got to figure out, well, how much of this is snow, how much of it is sleet, and how much of it is freezing rain. It's a flaw of the maps themselves, of the data that comes out with the Weather Service, where they figure out these, they figure out these numbers through the algorithms they use. So I'm not a big fan of these at all, and I think they have to be used, very, very carefully. One option is to use what's known as the positive snow growth map, okay? Because this is supposed to take into account sleet and freezing rain and melting. You can see the amounts here through 1 o'clock in the afternoon are far less, and I'll take it out even further if you want to believe the positive snow growth maps, and I still think these are somewhat flawed. You're looking at numbers that are only, for example, in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area, they're in about a 3-inch zone. Okay, for some reason, it kind of has this max finger that sticks across Pennsylvania into western New Jersey. I don't, if you take away the numbers and you just kind of go with the area, even the area I have issues with. The eastern part might make more sense. The western part, to me, I'm not so sure about. So here are a couple of reasons why I've got problems with this. I'm pulling up the numerical version of the NAM, okay? And I know it looks like a bunch of numbers here, but I'm just going to highlight what's important. This is called what we used to call the FOOS, all right? Actually, we still call the FOOS, except that only us older forecasters use this, and the young folks don't ever even bother to look at it. And what we can derive from these numbers, for example, if you each one of these 6, 12, 18, 24, those are 6-hour time frames that match up with the time frames of the map. So you've got 42 and 48 hours. This is what stood out to me when I looked at Philadelphia. Philadelphia at 42 hours, so this is at 7 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. We have a set of numbers here, and it gives you levels of relative humidity at 3 different levels of the atmosphere. And it's at 59%, 67%, and 66%. It's the first number is close to the ground. I forget what the second and third number is. I think the second number is around 4,000 feet, and the last number is at around 6,000 or 7,000 feet. I have to ask Joe Rayo, because he told me the other day what the numbers are, and my 60-year-old, the levels are, and my 60-year-old brain forgot them. But, you'll look at trends at these different levels of the atmosphere to see, is there dry air aloft? Is there the moisture on the ground? Is it very dry at the bottom part of the atmosphere? Is the top part of the atmosphere saturating? I mean, we are seeing some moisture coming in, but it's still relatively dry here at 7 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. The next number you see here, that minus 64, that is the vertical motion. When it's negative, it's sinking. When it's positive, you have positive vertical motion. Air is, you have energy rising. So a minus 6.4 is a very strong negative reading. It's telling you that you've got basically sinking air and dry air here that's going to be at play in the morning. Next, you run across this. One day we'll get into something where I'll explain what the thickness means, but it is basically a measure of how cold the atmosphere is. And usually when that number is 40 or less, it favors snow, although sometimes it could be as high as 46 or even higher under certain circumstances, but we'll use 40. Then you have a wind at the boundary layer, which is not that far off the ground, east at 6. I'm sorry, let me just correct that. This is that number is the sea level. I'm trying to make sure I got my parameters right. Yeah, okay, so that 35 is the sea level pressure, 1035. Then you've got the thickness, which tells you how cold, so that was what I just said with the 40. It's at 38. 98, 97, 96, you subtract that from 0. That tells you how cold those different levels of the atmosphere are. So you're at minus 2 Celsius, minus 3, minus 4. That should be cold enough for snow. It only gives 1500ths between 7 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the afternoon, okay? And by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that 40 is above 42, probably still supportive of snow, but you're getting closer now. You're starting to see some warming. Minus 3, minus 5, minus 7. That's as far out as it goes. So now what I'm going to look at is tonight when we go out with the new one, it'll go out 60 hours. So that'll take us through Wednesday night and into Thursday morning. So that will be a very valuable thing to look at. And what I'm going to be looking at is to see how much precip does it generate and how much, how warm and how fast, how warm does it get in the upper atmosphere. So it only gives 1500s. But my big concern is this sinking air, because we saw that last night where we had these vertical motions as the radar was starting to rev up with the system in the northeast. All of a sudden, the NAM started showing all this sinking air. And what wound up happening is, if you watch the radar last night as the precipitation was beginning to form over northeastern Pennsylvania and across New England and over New Jersey and Long Island, it was disorganized. It was very patchy. It never really got going. You had the southern moisture coming up, but it never connected with the moisture that was developing to the north. And the result was that you had this really, kind of messy non-event that wound up transpiring for a good chunk of southern New England and for areas down through northern New Jersey. Now, here's the other thing. For Washington, D.C., those same numbers, they give 44 hundredths of liquid for Wednesday morning. So that would translate to 4 inches of snow. But you are starting to see that thickness value go up to 48. That's pretty high. The bottom levels of the atmosphere are pretty cold, -2, -2, -2. But that thickness is going up. So it's telling you that the highest levels, going up above 10,000 feet and beyond, that those levels may be warming fairly rapidly. So I just wonder, how much precip are you going to be able to produce before you start to see a change over to sleet and freezing rain, and then ultimately to rain. That's kind of, that's a big issue here. Now here's another problem. Take a look at this surface map. Think back to last week. We had, going into last week's system, that high that you see near Binghamton, New York at 1 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday was actually sitting north of New York State in southern Quebec province and wound up going into Maine. This high is not in a good spot. Well, for one thing, it's forcing dry air southward. So it's in a very good spot for snow for you folks in Virginia on that leading edge, because you've got your cold air that's wedging down. But as we move through the daytime on Wednesday, that high from upstate New York, and here at this point it's in an okay position for the Northeast and the northern Mid-Atlantic, but that high winds up going out over New Jersey. Suddenly it's sitting in southeast PA. You've got high pressure basically centered right over New York City. This is a problem for me, because this is a problem with the fact that there's going to be dry air that's going to be coming down and eroding some of this snow. This is one of the reasons why you saw on that numerical guidance that I showed you the sinking air, because you've got this high that is not in a good position. It is going to create problems for this snow area as it moves northward. And notice, as we go through Wednesday afternoon into Wednesday evening, there seems to be a peak area here where the snow kind of blossoms out a little bit between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. That high is now east of New Jersey, south of Nantucket. You don't have a northeast wind trying to hold cold air in. You have more of an east or southeast wind, and that is going to begin the warming process. And if you watch what happens with the NAM after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that snow area weakens, and all of a sudden you got the sleet line pushes way north in that 3-hour time frame. It goes from near Wilmington, Delaware, to almost to New York City between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. This is not a lot of snow that's being produced in this particular area of northern New Jersey, Long Island, southern New England. And at this point, by the way, of course, in Maryland and in southern Pennsylvania, you've changed over to sleet, and that continues, in freezing rain, and that continues into Wednesday night and then gradually, of course, with the main low, the primary low going way to the west, you start to get the precipitation to turn to rain and then gradually taper off and ending. This is not the signature of a big storm, folks. You're going to have to do it on whatever, however the radar sets up. And I'm going to give you another alternative, and that's the GFS. Okay, the GFS has a real problem here. Poses a real problem. There's your snow area. It's less impressive than the NAM, in my view. Your high at this point is in an okay spot up in northern Vermont, but here too, it drops southeastward and moves off the southeastern New England coast near Nantucket and wants to go to the south. If that high were sitting up in Maine, it'd be a whole different story, but it's not. It's being pushed out to the southeast. You still have this wedge of cold air, but how much of this is actually reaching the ground? I don't know. I mean, you look at the sounding here, for example. I pulled up the sounding point. I'll pull up a sounding point right in central New Jersey. And you're looking at a temperature of 31, okay? All the levels here are below freezing. I have a instructional video on soundings and how to understand them. But basically, we're looking at the atmosphere. We're taking a point in time and looking at the atmosphere from the bottom up. It's when we look at these maps, we're looking at what we assume is a flat surface. So now we're looking at the atmosphere like we're looking straight ahead, and we're looking from the bottom up. So from the surface, you'll notice that the zero line is this sloped line. That's the freezing line. So the temperature is below freezing all the way through at this point. This is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Watch what happens between 1 and 7 to that area of snow. It just gets it gets destroyed. It gets destroyed by warmer air coming up at the mid levels and the high being out where it is. You've got southeast isobars here. That is not good. Warm air is flooding inland, and I think you're going to see this come in faster than the NAM implies that the warm air has a really tough time. I think that the NAM is wrong. The NAM has not done well with the few events that we've had. It has not done well, including the event from last night, especially when you're looking beyond 36 or 48 hours. It just hasn't worked. And I think the GFS's idea, where all this warm air comes flooding in, changes everything over to sleet and then to rain. It happens much faster, and I'm agreeing with this idea, especially with that primary low so far to the west and no real secondary. I mean, there's a weak secondary low here, but again, it's not like last time in that sense because of where the high goes out. You get a secondary low, but it's not going to be able to pinch off the warm air like the last system did. So I don't have. I have my reasons for being below models, below snowfall maps, and you can disagree with me. Forecaster is entitled to their opinion, and at the end of the day, it becomes what was the outcome and what did you forecast? And as I said, we could revisit this tomorrow. And we'll take a look. There was one other thing about the NAM I wanted to show you that I thought was pretty interesting. We're gonna look at up at 700 millibars, which is roughly about 10,000 feet or so, give or take a few. And I'm going to bring up this particular map that's on Tropical Tidbits. It shows you the temperature contours at that level and the advection of air from one point to another, and the frontogenesis that is occurring. That area that you see in red, in that purple area, this is where you would likely see the heaviest precip. So if you want to make the assumption that in this band, this is where you're going to see your heavy 1 inch an hour more of snow. And that moves up northward. We're at 7 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, so this would imply that you probably would see, your heavier snows starting to move into the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area during the morning. But notice as we move northward what happens to this area. It's very impressive here, okay? You've got, at this point, you probably have the maximum amount of contrasting air masses between the cold air to the north and the warm air advecting up from the south. But after 7 o'clock on Wednesday, this area begins to shrink and shrink and shrink as it heads up toward New York City. And this is another reason why I am, really suspect as far as snow amounts on the northern end of this. You could also probably assume that as this is moving up, it tells you that there's probably going to be a 3 or 4 hour thump of snow. And if that winds up happening, you get an inch or so an hour, you could put down a quick 3 or 4 inches. But again, I'm struggling with pushing up for higher amounts. With the footnote that elevation in northwestern Virginia, western Maryland, and going into southern Pennsylvania, I mean those are local issues that I don't have a firm grasp on. But for the areas, the bigger cities, Washington D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, I really would lean more toward the low end of the numbers than the higher end. Okay, so that kind of takes care of, in my view, what we're doing, forecast-wise. So once again, here are the Weather Service numbers with respect to what they're going for. This is through 7 a.m. Thursday, so the event is all done. There's nothing to add to all of this. And this was mine, which is less bullish than what is being forecast by the models. All right, let's look at the long range real quick and take a look at that. I want to see if this is going to go under the, one of the things that's going on right now is the grasping of straws everywhere. As we're starting to, the realization is coming to a lot of snow lovers that there is, this is not like last year. And there really is a time issue at play. We're going to have to, for some reason, his North America view has not been ingesting data, so we're going to look at this. We're going to have to look at this at both sides, which is probably a better idea anyway, so we can get a full flavor of what happens with the jet stream. We know what the song and dance is, folks. Ridge wear in the east, trough wear in the west. That's not good for snowstorms. You've got a deepening trough in the central Atlantic. That means that the ridges have to pop up strongly on either side, which they do. You can see the big ridge off the southeast coast, and you can also see the big ridge on the far right that's popping up over England and Ireland and Western Europe, thanks to that deep trough in the middle of the Atlantic. That trough lifts out, another one comes right into its place, and the ridge is still there off the southeast coast. We're now into next weekend. So there's likely to be another system next weekend that's going to cut to the Great Lakes. So that's a rain event for just about everybody. Deep trough in the central Atlantic, ridge off the southeast coast, strong ridge off the coast of Europe. Not good. And then after that, you finally get something. That system for next Sunday looks like it wants to kick that trough out of the central Atlantic. And yes, Mr. Rayo.
A new round of food has just arrived.
Oh, good. I'll be there in a bit.
Okay.
So that trough gets kicked out in the central Atlantic from that system from next Sunday. So that starts the changes that actually brings a trough into the east. Yippee! For you winter weather lovers, we're now at February 28th, and you finally have the more of the trough in the east. But notice it's just this kind of broad bowl that is settling into the east. There's no definition to it. You don't really see any short waves in there. There is one that comes down and sort of rotates through as we move into the first days of March. And what happens? Toward the end of the period, it starts to pull out, and you start to get western energy being ejected eastward. So it would suggest that maybe for the first week of March, you might get into a pattern that takes you to more seasonal temperatures. And then after that, you can maybe kiss it goodbye because the ridge may come back. That's what it seems to be. All right, so the Pacific is not updating. Let's see if it's updating from earlier. Okay, so we do have the one from earlier today, so at least we have that. All right, so we've been illustrating the problem in the Pacific and how the jet stream in the Pacific is just, it's a fire hose halfway across. You've got this ridge up into the Gulf of Alaska, the deep trough out in the west. We are now at Friday. We've got another system that drops down into the west, and yet another one that follows after that. And then that's the one that's going to take the trough and swing it east. You finally start to get a little bit of ridging there in the west, only to have a system crash in. And what happens as we get out into the long range? You guessed it. You got this, fire hose almost again, trough from the Aleutian straight south, ridge up into the Gulf of Alaska, or ridging into the Gulf of Alaska, and the trough wanting to come back into the western part of the United States. It's very, very hard to get bullish when you see this unrelenting Pacific jet just not letting go. It briefly relaxes for short periods of time where it allows little things to happen, and then it just goes right back. I've seen a number of arguments there on various places in social media with regards to there's no NAO. Well, that's to me is a non-starter, because I can give you a list of snowstorms a mile long that happened in the eastern part of the United States with a positive NAO, and I can show you a few that had a strongly positive NAO. It's not the NAO, okay? It's not. It's not the El Nino alone. I think it's it's the Pacific and the Atlantic jet. They're just horrible, and they haven't wanted to change for at least for any long duration of time. And some people are talking about the Madden-Julian oscillation being in favorable phases right now. Good luck with that, because you know what? They may be in favorable phases. They're not teleconnecting with the Pacific jet and changing the Pacific jet. Maybe it briefly does when we get that relaxation at the very end of February, beginning of March for a handful of days, and then it just goes right back. So I honestly, I think we're, there's always the possibility of something trying to sneak in. If it's going to do that, it's going to have to do it in the first 10 days of March, because I think after that, it'll be pretty much done, with the exception of a rare anomaly that might pop up. I just don't see it. Now, I just want to touch base on the fact that we do have big flood watches up for a lot of the Tennessee and the Ohio Valley, and we're looking at 7-inch plus rains for the next week in many areas here through Tennessee, Kentucky, northern Alabama, northern Mississippi, eastern Arkansas, and that heavy rain also extends into West Virginia and even into western Virginia. So, you've got solid liquid amounts here that are going to be produced over the next 7 days by the two storm systems we're dealing with, the one for Tuesday, Wednesday, and then the next one after that for Saturday, Sunday. The west calms down a bit. You got activity in the northwest to some degree, and there's some substantial activity in the southwest, with a lot of that coming right now with heavy snows and rains in the lower elevations, heavy snows in much of the northern half of Arizona and into New Mexico and parts of Colorado. That system, of course, being kicked eastward to make our storm for later Tuesday, Wednesday into Thursday. So I think that pretty much covers it, folks. I give you my reasoning. You might not agree with it. You may not necessarily like it. Let's see where we are tomorrow. Maybe I'll be changing my mind. Maybe not. But I've laid my case down as far as what I expect is going to happen. Jason Bauer, so that doesn't sound good for Western North Carolina snow lovers unless we get a perfect short setup yes, I agree. You're going to wind up, you're going to get a very short window that's going to open up for you with this, and that is you're going to have to take advantage of that, because then you're going to go over to sleet and freezing rain. The cold snap in early March, if you want to call it a cold snap, Steve LaPointe. I think it just brings temperatures down to seasonal. And you start getting into March, you have to have, seasonal doesn't cut it anymore because, for New York City, for example, the first days of March, your average high is up at 45, 46. So you really need a good push of below average temperatures to start coming down. Particularly you start getting, every day the normal goes up by 1 degree. So there's a huge difference between March 1st and March 10th in terms of what is seasonal. March 1st seasonal is 45, March 10th is 48. March 20th it's around 50, 51, and then going up. So it may not be enough. Dio Nankumar, instructional video on how to read the ensembles in the long range. Yes, I will do that. And I'm also going to plan to do one on the teleconnections as well once things settle down. I had a stretch there where I was able to do 4 of them back to back to back, and then the snow event started popping up. So as soon as this snow event is done, I will start putting some more on there. So later this week, I'll get to it, and that's going to require, I'm probably going to have to do a little pre-production with that and the teleconnections one as well. I want to show you exactly what the geographic areas of the teleconnections are and why they aren't the magic bullets that some people think they are. Joe Rayo, no, he didn't order food, Reaver. Usually on holidays here at work, they bring food in because everything around here is closing. Bender, we're all out of straws. Yes, there are very few straws left to grasp. Look, if this were December 18th, we wouldn't even be having this conversation while the fiends out there would have declared winter over back on December 15th in a situation like this. But we're at February 18th now, and last year we were seeing the split in the polar vortex. There was a lot of signs in the models popping up about a blocking pattern developing, and it wound up coming to pass. But it doesn't, it's not there. It's not there. Let's see. I'm just running up to Johnny Quest. You got your rowboat out ready for your snow to rain. You're going to put all that snow down, and then you're going to melt it all the way. Can I show the upper air from last March to show the difference between this year and last year? Okay, that's a good thing to do. I'll put it on my list of things to do, and I'll have to dig it up. So I'll try and find it when I have some downtime and set something up once this snow event is done, and then everybody's going to start asking about the first half of March, and I'm sure you're going to see, it's already out there, people saying, all sorts of things about the first half of March and all the bullishness, and I'm just not seeing it. Timothy Veltman, sinking air dries out and eats away at the northern extent of the snow and warms up the air. And I think that is a real danger, that you're going to see that dry air with that high do exactly that. It's going to eat away at that northern extent of the snow as it's coming up into New Jersey and through southeastern PA. And that's why I'm thinking about leading to the lower end of all of this. Izzy D, this Foos thing sounds very interesting, but I don't really understand. So all, I know I bring up stuff sometimes that's kind of out there, but eventually the light bulbs do go off. I promise you. You'll get it at some point. But basically what the Foos is, it's just a numerical breakdown of the maps, so that we can look at real temperatures for different levels. We can look at how cold the atmosphere, how warm it is. How much, how strong is that? You have a system coming up. Well, how strong is it really? That is what those numbers tell us. And, I look at a map that's got a patch of blue. I want to know, well, how much precip is it producing? And I can look at those Foos numbers, and it'll tell you 15 hundredths, 22 hundredths, half an inch, et cetera, et cetera. You can add them up for every 6-hour period, and you can figure out how much total precip the model is actually forecasting. Zim, New York. Okay, so I guess I'm sorry. You were in a conversation with someone else, but it's nice to see you on board tonight. along with everybody else. I really appreciate everybody coming on here night after night. It is so cool. When would you ever use the NAM? The NAM is actually, last year the NAM was very, very good. And this year, it's just, I've noticed in the few snow events that we've had, it's been god awful. Make Long Island bias. It should be 0-0. I have to tell you, I really, this winter just so much reminds me of some of those winters in the late 90s, particularly the winter of 97, 98, when we didn't even put down an inch of snow, I think, until like March 22nd or March 23rd, where we got a freak 5-inch snowfall that fell in a very, very small geographic area over Long Island, New York City, and a few places nearby, and that was it. That was absolutely it for the whole season. The only snowfall actually came outside of the winter season. At least we've seen this peppering of a coating to an inch a few times in all of this. Why, the other big question to me, Phil P., thanks for hitting Super Chat. Yes, NWS has you in the winter storm watch in Middlesex County in New Jersey. I think that's a little, I don't know. I thought that was a bit of a reach. I could kind of understand them putting them up for the western counties. I thought pushing it to Middlesex was just a bit of a reach, my opinion. Look, either I'm going to look really, really good or really, really bad come Wednesday, all right? But at least you know where I stand in all of this. And unless I see some radical changes in the models tomorrow, I doubt very seriously that I am going to change my forecast. Chris Alley, always good to see you on board. Doug Crum, yeah, your trees are budding in Atlanta. You're going to have some warm air with this system tracking the way it is. And at least you're going to have to wait with that ridge in the east like this. You're not getting any of these cold, nobody's getting any of that. Real cold air is being pinned up more toward the Great Lakes and Plains, and some of it is sneaking into the east, at least enough of it to cause these events that we've had. Amazing with the trough. It's actually quite amazing with the trough as far west as it is that we're actually even having this occurring is a surprise. John Curry, the SREF has 3/4 of an inch of freezing rain for Johnstown. That's the real big question for me too, John. Is how the warming that's going to occur. Is it going to make it down to the low levels of the atmosphere? Is this going? Certainly at the higher levels, it's going to happen. But with the absence of a wrapped up low, I have to wonder whether some areas are going to see the cold air trapped for a while. Away from the coast. I mean, inland and across Pennsylvania, that could be a problem, and that's the one area where I'm not that different with regards to what the Weather Service is doing, because they understand that their local climatology a lot more than I do, the effect of the geography and everything, the topography and everything else. So I don't have a good feel for I don't have a good feel for it sitting here where I am in Long Island and southeastern New York, so I have to defer to them. Don and Sue Cunningham, who hopes the Midwest will see lots of severe weather? Well, severe weather season's going to be here soon enough. Also, I would just leave you with this. I know that the winter for areas in the I-95 corridor from Portland, Maine, down to around Philadelphia or so, this has been incredibly disappointing. But remember, there's a whole nother part of the United States, and you go not too far north and west of the snow hole, and the snowfalls this winter have been close to or even a little bit above normal in some places. And then you head toward the western Great Lakes, for example, the whole upper Midwest, back through the plains. Yes, the West, they're seeing an exceptional winter when it comes to snow and to some extent cold. In fact, Seattle, as Steve LaPointe, you just pointed out, 25 inches for the winter. This is one of their snowiest winters in recent memory. I believe it's the snowiest February on record. And I also saw something today that it may be Scott Briller, did you send me the thing about Seattle being the coldest February on record? So, there is winter going on someplace in a big way. I've gotten very spoiled in the I-95 stretch for the last 6 years in a row, where most, but not all, have enjoyed above normal winters, 6 above normal winters. I certainly have, New York City, et cetera, et cetera. But we were due for a subpar year, a subpar season. I wouldn't draw any conclusions going forward off of one subpar season. Okay, this winter, it reminds me a lot of the winters of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. If you lived through that stretch in the I-95 corridor, you understand what I'm getting at. That was a stretch of one disappointing winter from the standpoint of snowfall after another in most, but not all areas. Boston had some good years in that stretch, but for New York City, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. in particular, there were a lot of lean years in that 30-year stretch, and that flipped in 2000 to the other extreme. So I wouldn't draw any conclusion just because we had one subpar winter. It doesn't mean we're about to have 6 or 7 of them in a row. Back in that stretch, you pretty much you would have one solid winter of snow in the I-95 corridor, and then you'd have 6 or 7 subpar winters. I don't know that we're at a point where this sort of decadal shift that occurred back around 2000, if it's come to an end. It's hard to tell from the data how long these shifts, these long-term shifts, how long they last. But it's one winter. It was bound to happen. We are basically running out of time here. The clock is running out, and maybe something will pop up in early March at the last minute and give us a one-time surprise. I just don't see it at the moment, and I wouldn't necessarily put my bet on it. All right. Speaking of time running out, mine's running out too, so it's time to say goodnight. Enjoyed the show tonight. We covered a lot and did a lot of new and interesting things, so I just hope this all gives you a different perspective of how to look at all of this. And as I said, I've got my forecasters now. My cards are on the table. Let's see what happens. Download the free app on Google Play or on the App Store. It's available for all mobile devices, and it's absolutely free. And you can use it for your own area too, because you can get current conditions and the forecast for your location. You just have to put the location in. And I'm planning at some point to do an update on this. And one of the things I'm going to do is, I want to do is to add a geolocation setup so that you don't have to put in your location every single time. Just have to kind of work out the details. And for the other thing I would like to do that I'm doing some research on to see if we can do this is for those of you that are on my paid platform, my Patreon platform, which is a great way to support my channel, and it just costs $2 a month. You can. What I'm trying to do is perhaps create some kind of linkage where you can go from the app. If you're a Patreon member, you can switch from the app right over to Patreon seamlessly without having to open 2 different apps. So that's another project that I have in mind. I've got links up in the comments section to Patreon and to the app, and also on the descriptor to this live stream and the descriptor to this video. The Joe and Joe Weather Show tonight at 9:25ish on my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. I'm going to try and do a Patreon live stream for Patreon members tomorrow morning at about 10 o'clock. We'll wait for after the NAM is done, and we'll take a look at that. And yes, let me just start hawking the fact that on Tuesday, March 12th, for those of you who are in the great state of New Jersey, I will be at the Westwood Library in Westwood, New Jersey at 7 o'clock on March the 12th. All are invited. It's absolutely free. We'll have a great time. I always have a good time at my library talks. I haven't done one in a few months, so this will be the first one of 2019. So if you can come out, do so. I don't even think you need to let the library know ahead of time. You can just show up, but it's always good to Go to the Westwood Library website, see if they have a registration thing. So this way they have a rough idea of how many people are coming and that there's enough interest. So Westwood Library, Westwood, New Jersey, March 12th, 7 o'clock. And I'll remind you guys again down the road. Have a great night, everybody. We will see you maybe later on Facebook. Bye now.